Metal. I am Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, and my co-host is Chris K. On today's episode, we are revisiting an episode we did 100 episodes ago, but we're approaching it from a different angle.
2 years ago on episode 18, we discussed Kiss Masked versus Unmasked, where we focused more on the music side of the story. This time, we're taking it more from a personal point of view. We're going to focus on the hows and whys of some of the decisions Kiss made throughout their career and the consequences of those decisions, as well as how the band members viewed what Kiss meant.
From developing their makeup, refusing to back down when other bands didn't like their antics, replacing members, to taking off the makeup, re-energizing their career, and then putting the makeup back on, it always seemed like Kiss were on the brink of collapse just to rise again. Today, we dive into Kiss, the 70s versus the 80s versus now. Chris, 100 episodes ago, we talked about Kiss, and it was masked versus unmasked. And this time, it's a little bit different. I know this was sort of your baby in terms of wanting to do this episode, which doesn't bother me because I'm a Kiss fan.
Well, I mean, back then, I didn't know as much about Kiss, and so having listened to, bits of Paul Stanley's book, interviews with Gene, interviews with Peter, interviews with Ace, you get more of a perspective of how, there's always multiple sides to a story. If there's 4 people in a story, then there's probably 5 sides, right? There's each one of theirs, and then there's the truth somewhere in between. And that's kind of what I see more now. There's a perspective of how these guys view what Kiss is, and then there's all the other members that have been in since. So it's kind of an interesting story, and I kind of wanted to revisit it based on what we discussed last time.
Okay, well, I mean, I have no problem revisiting Kiss because I love talking about Kiss. I remember as a kid, I defended Kiss vehemently during the Dynasty era, during the Unmasked era, during the Elder period, and basically just throughout their career and throughout my adulthood. I mean, it's one of those things where you really you were proud to be a Kiss fan when you were around other Kiss fans, but in some ways it was almost like you were ashamed to say you were a Kiss fan in a lot of different kinds of scenarios and circumstances with other people around. Like everybody was a Priest fan, Van Halen fan, Maiden fan, Metallica fan, but when it came to Kiss, it was like, yeah, I like Kiss too. Kind of like you were in a back corner, barely raising your hand sometimes because you didn't know what to expect. You didn't know if you were going to be in a room full of Kiss haters or Kiss fans. And, if you were in a room with Kiss haters, it was like, oh, they suck. They sold out. They turned disco. It all depended on what era you were talking about or in at the time. So it was one of those things where as a kid, it was tough. As an adult, it was probably just as tough when you were in those circumstances.
I think a lot of times when you're part of a fandom of any band or any other property like that, there's going to, especially when there's longevity there's going to be that kind of dissension with certain people. We've talked about it with other bands where, they reach a point where they change stylistically or something like that, and they say, oh, they're sellouts, etc. And It at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If you enjoy it, you enjoy it. But when, like with Kiss, it's always interesting to me because like Kiss has such a strong fan base, and there's different people or like people that support different eras of the band, etc. But you have like the Kiss Army, where people will defend every bit of what Kiss has done, and really buy into the whole concept of it, the everything from the merchandise, like even to like the Kiss caskets and all that stuff. So it is a really just intense fan base. It's very interesting, and I've seen them live, and it was a spectacle. Not just the band, but seeing the fans, people dressed up of all ages, wearing the face paint, all that stuff. It was interesting to see.
When did you see Kiss?
Oh, man. It would have been early 2000s. somewhere around there. I guess maybe more late 2000s.
So it was probably, was it the farewell tour, or was Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer already in the band?
Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer were already in the band.
Okay.
Like,
all right.
it would have been like late 2000s.
Okay, so it was one of those
maybe
tours.
2009, somewhere around there.
Okay, cool. And, and that, it's funny, and we're going to kind of touch upon that, but that show, or that you went to, was probably more of a spectacle than the shows that happened in the 70s. And the funny thing about it, because Paul, I was just reading recently, Paul mentioned something similar to that there is this, actually I wasn't reading, I was listening to a podcast with him and, what's his name from Rage Against the Machine, the guitar player.
Tom Morello.
Yes, Tom Morello. So I was listening to Tom Morello's podcast that he puts out, and this was from earlier this year, and Paul was on the show, and he was talking about how when they reunited and they did the shows, post reunion basically, and everything since then. So since '96 and on, okay, the shows have been more bombastic and they've been bigger and more elaborate than anything they did in the 70s. And it was a thing that they were living up to, or trying to live up to, what people thought they saw in the 70s, as opposed to what they actually saw. Because, and I can attest to this. I mean, I didn't see any shows in the 70s, but I have the videos, and there was nothing in the videos that would sit there and say that it was a bombastic spectacle, like the inner sleeve to Kiss Alive 2. Okay, that never happened. I mean, it happened for that picture, but what it was they literally took the picture as if they were on top of the risers. Everything was open, so they're at 20 feet in the air. The riser's 20 feet, the drum riser's 20 feet in the air. They take the picture as soon as they set off all the bombs. But in reality, they said that the way that picture set up, that never happened. Fans didn't see that, and that's the crazy part about it. I mean, they saw the flames go up, but it was during like one song, or the beginning of one song, or the end of one song, and then when the risers went up, they would shoot off stuff, and it would be like a flash pop, but it would not be a full blown flame all the time and stuff like that. So it was an image that they tried to portray that people have in their mind that really never existed.
That's interesting.
It is, and we'll talk about it now as we basically go into a lot of what went on during the 70s and 80s and what's going on now. So why don't we go ahead and start there in the 70s, and kind of we'll give a brief as possible a history of how the band started. Kiss forms in 1973 after Gene and Paul, they had been in Wicked Lester. They had met each other a few years earlier. Paul realized that he was a better musician with Gene and had a better chance of success with Gene than without. And so they decided to make this band. They quit Wicked Lester. They left him hanging high and dry with a record deal and everything, and basically put together Kiss. They got Peter Criss through an advertisement in a local magazine. I can't remember which one it was again.
And that was a weird story too. Just the way he introduced himself and carried himself, etc. It just that's part of what interests me about Kiss.
Peter Criss, for lack of a better term and being very punny, was a strange cat. Okay, and as a kid, going through this period, so I was introduced to Kiss in 1977, and having to kind of go back just a few years, really, and kind of learn about them. I mean, I bought a book, or was given a book that was, probably a couple hundred pages, paperback type of thing. So in reality, a hardcover was probably 125 pages or something like that, and it just kind of goes over their history real briefly, and just reading those things and catching up, and then seeing how Kiss Meets the Phantom in 1978 was a disaster. But as a kid, you don't think it's a disaster. You think, wow, I'm seeing my favorite guys on TV. I don't know that they're acting horribly bad. It just on television. It's so cool. They're superheroes, lasers through the eyeballs. It's a concert, fake kiss versus real kiss. But
you know what I compare that to is so when I was a little kid, Ninja Turtles were huge,
right?
And there was a concert of them playing, songs, and they were really bad songs, and they weren't obviously playing the instruments because they had, the costumes on and stuff like that, and so, but when you're a little kid, that's so cool, and there's the fantasy of it, and
right.
To some degree, it's the same thing, even though it's not really true musicianship or anything like that, but it's the spectacle. You don't realize like this is way worse than it actually.
Right. I mean, you look back now and you watch Kiss Me to Phantom of the Park, and it's just like some of the worst acting.
Yes, it's the same level of what I was talking about.
It's just horrible.
It's bad.
And then when you find out the backstory that Kiss, never learned their lines, they're being fed the lines scene by scene.
Who was it that was dubbed over?
Peter Criss.
Was it Peter?
Because all Ace Frehley did the whole show.
Because he was a spaceman, right?
He was a spaceman. He was just, or something about, Curly, he was just, it was just bad writing overall. but anyway, so yes, Peter was a strange cat. Yeah, the circumstances behind his joining the band was strange. Ace Frehley comes in, plugs in during the guitar sessions. Paul and Gene are actually having a conversation with Bob Kulick at the time, who tried out for the band. But unfortunately, they were really good friends with Bob Kulick, and they really liked him, but Bob did not have the look. I'm assuming that Bob was bald at the time. Although that was not necessarily a thing that people were, that was not a look that was kind of normal back then in 1973. He didn't have the look for them, so he was disqualified. But they grew a friendship with him that they maintained all the way up through basically his death a couple years ago. But Ace really plugs in, and immediately when they play with Ace, the chemistry is there. So they choose Ace. He's their guy. They get some gigs. And immediately they learn that Ace Frehley is one of the laziest people on the planet because he refuses to load his own gear. So, between Peter Criss and his demands right up front and Ace Frehley being lazy, you kind of knew if you were an outsider, this shit was wrong from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, there was such a clash of culture between Peter and Ace and Gene and Paul. I mean, we all know this, right? Obviously, that's the big reason why those two guys are not in the band anymore. But you really hear it when you hear them talk. It's not one-sided. They are really genuinely very different people.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny because Paul would later on talk about Peter and put him in a light that I think Paul really is misunderstanding Peter, calling Peter somewhat anti-Semitic and everything like that. And, Peter, it was just Peter's the oldest one in the band. So there's this thing about the way he grew up and all of us are guilty of it. The way we grew up and the way we talked when we were kids and teenagers and young adults are pretty much the same way we talk now. So as times have changed, some things are inappropriate. Some things are no longer viewed as the right way to converse, the right words to use. So Peter, used certain things, certain phrases about Paul and Gene that some would view today as being anti-Semitic. But when you're thinking about it as a person who grew up in the 60s and the 70s, that's something that's just the way those people talked. and that's the way the attitude that they had. But it didn't necessarily mean that they liked him less as a person, that they were anti-Semitic or anything like that. It's just that was just something that was like a stereotype of that kind of person. And so, Paul didn't take kindly to it, made some accusations. Peter, denied that and stuff like that. And I get it, so I think that was just a bad look on Paul's part, but you're exactly right when it comes to the clash of cultures. Peter being Italian and almost mafia-like, Ace being Italian but completely different type of Italian, and Paul and Jean being Jews, Jean being from Israel, Paul growing up in a Jewish household. So it was one of those things, that they definitely were raised differently. They definitely were taught different basic values, and it definitely reared its ugly head throughout the years, or especially early on.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a difference between them. Like, one of my favorite stories is listening to them talk about, they're taking their photo shoot for their first album, and they had a makeup artist come in, and they're putting on their makeup, and then Peter comes out, and he's got the makeup that ended up on the cover of the first album, and they look at him like, what the hell is this? This is not what you wear. Like, what are you doing? And they end up having that on the first album, and that's the only time he ever had that makeup. And I just think that's hilarious. He had this thing in his head that everything had to be like bigger or like different or something, and so he comes out and he puts this makeup on, and it doesn't represent what they look like on stage.
No,
and it's
hilarious.
Funny
because I'm looking at 3 pictures that I have of that photo session. Mm-hmm. And I touch upon it in my notes. In 1995, when Kiss did the Kiss conventions, well, actually a couple years earlier, when fans were putting out their own Kiss conventions, which are now called Kiss Expos. This one show I went to in '92. They had a dealer who had photo proofs from the first album cover, or from the first album photo shoot, and there was 8 of them, and they were all behind this bulletproof plexiglass, and the first 4 were sold to dealers before the show opened, and the other 4 were made available to the fans that came to the shows, and I was there probably all day long. And those 4 things were still there throughout most of the day. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think I bought the last one, but I ended up buying one of the proofs. And I actually brought it to Eckerd Drugs when I lived in Miami, and they made an 18x24 photo of that using that proof. And, I told someone about that one time, and they're like, "Are you crazy? You actually left it in their hands?" And I'm like, I didn't know any better, but I got it back, and I still have it. And I got a really cool, it's a photograph. I have an 18x24 photograph, and it's now currently signed by Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons. And so the next year I went
cool.
to...
I've seen it, yeah.
Say what now?
I mean, it's pretty cool. I've seen it.
Yeah. So the next year I went back to the Kiss Expo again. I think the following year had Eric Singer as one of the speakers. I don't know if it was that one or not. No, it may have been a couple years later, but it had Peter Criss actually was one of the speakers. And one of the dealers, as soon as I walked in, one of the dealers had purchased one of those pictures, and he made 24 by 36 inch posters of one of his version of the cover. And so I bought that, and I have it signed by Paul, Gene, and Peter. Peter signed it from that show. So it was pretty freaking cool. I've never met Ace Frehley, so I don't have his autograph anywhere other than a photo that he sent me when I was part of his fan club. So that's disappointing in that regards, but it's so cool. And then I have a small version of it. It's like an 8x10 of a third different version of that cover, and that one's framed, and it has the picks, the guitar picks that represent each member of the band. Even Peter Criss has one. I got one from his solo tour that he used to hand them out. Even though he plays drums, he would hand out guitar picks because they were pretty cool to hand out. So anyhow,
So 1973 to 1975. I mean, I think during that time period, the Kiss, the band, the four members of Kiss, probably were the most active as as members of the band. Like when it came to recording, playing all the parts, etc. Right? That was when they were the most unified as a group. Am I
yes,
am I wrong in saying? Yeah,
they were together. They were all in it for the same reasons. Yeah, I mean, they get a manager who believes in them, and it's basically one of those all for one for all type of things for the first 2 years or 3 years. I mean, basically the first album comes out in the beginning of 74. So from all of 74, all of 75, the band is in it together, and they're in it to basically, we're either going to succeed or we're going to die trying. And they record 3 albums in I think it's a 13-month span or 18-month span or something like that. And that's insane when you think about that.
yeah.
It was actually all 3 albums, Kiss, Hotter Than Hell, and Dress to Kill, were released within a 13-month span. Just think about that. What people can't even fart nowadays in a 13-month span, let alone put out 3 albums.
It's tough to fart for 13 months straight. I'll tell you that.
That's insane. And you also realize when you start looking at the albums, like Dress to Kill is only I think 32 minutes long. Nowadays that's an EP. And
30 minutes and 7 seconds.
So you see that, and it was funny because I was reading, some notes on it, and they said that they put the space in between the songs was longer just to make the album feel longer.
Wow.
So you're talking, it's a 10-second gap in between songs just so you can feel like it's a longer album. I mean, that's how short it was. But the record company Casablanca, which basically Kiss was the first band signed to Casablanca, was in financial ruin at this point. They didn't know what to do with Kiss because their shows were selling out. They were doing great on the road, but no one could capture their sound, and no one was buying the music, the records and tapes, because it just wasn't connecting in that same way. And I disagree with the fact that they say it was because you couldn't capture our sound. I disagree with that because I think the first album sounded good, but it didn't have that live feel. The second album was terrible in terms of production. And then the third album was actually done really, really well, but it's just a matter of the energy's not there. I guess you could put it that way.
And that's kind of what Alive did, was it gave them that crowd sound, the illusion that they were live. And I mean,
it's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, we all know kind of the backstory of that, but I mean, sounds were added, etc. Things were changed, re-recorded in the studio. We know that, but it still presents the sound of a live show, and it captured people's attention. And Alive is what really, in some way, saved Kiss, and I mean, to some degree, saved Casablanca. Correct?
Yes, no, it definitely saved Casablanca. It definitely saved the band, because at that point it was like, well, we've gotten 3 albums. If we can't make this, if we can't make it on this next one, there's just no point in going on, So, Alive was definitely a testament to their live show. The energy is just incredible that's coming off that record. I mean, you put that on today, and you can still feel energy coming off of that record because of the way that Paul and the band played in general. The way Paul was just the front man, and the things that he said and did throughout the songs was just incredible. But that leads them. Okay, so now they have the success with this. They have a gold record with Live, because they didn't at that time, they weren't presenting platinum records. So, but they got a gold record, and then they said, okay, well, now it's time to put a new album out again. So now 1976 comes around. They're going to go record their album Destroyer. They get a producer, Bob Ezrin, and they completely go away from the whole fact that they just did a live record. Not to say that they should have done a live album, in the studio, but it's like it's completely overproduced. But yet it worked for them.
Yeah, I mean it's a different direction for sure, but yeah, I mean Destroyer was huge.
Yeah. I mean it worked. And to kind of put a bow on the whole thing with 1970, 73 to 75, that, as you said, that was the time that they were most cohesive, most together. Now they have success at the end of 1975, and that success brings money, which now they have money flowing in their pockets, and merchandise is starting to sell, and certain things are starting to happen. Going into 1976 and the second half of their 70s career, if you want to put it that way, things change dramatically from this point forward. So that's 73 to 75. The Kiss Army was born during that time. Crazy things happen. Now they're doing Destroyer. And, it's completely different. And do you have any comments to say about Destroyer? I mean, I know you've listened to the album and stuff like that. What do you think?
So Destroyer to me is such a huge difference between what came before. They were 70s rock, and this still is, but this is like arena kind of sounding to some degree. It's got Bob Ezrin's fingerprints on every song pretty much. It's very, like you said, very overproduced, but not in a bad way per se, because a lot of people love this album. But to me, it's like, it's the same kind of thing as when the band says, we talked about Sepultura, right? With Chaos AD and then Roots. They put out that album and they have a producer that says, look, like, you guys are doing a good job, but let's take this into the direction to become as pop culture as possible, right? Like, this was going to be the album that defines you. And so every time that happens, when they get a producer in and there's someone that says, like, let's do this and you're going to be the biggest band ever, you're taking like that rawness and like the musicianship out of it to some extent. And what's happening is, you're becoming a machine. You're becoming a product. And that's really, like, to me, Destroyer's that moment where, and like, they went back to things with, like, Love Gun to me is less produced, and I really like that album. Rock and Roll Over is better to me than Destroyer. But, like, this is, like, the pop culture moment, I guess, for Kiss. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, you're right on when you say all that, and it's funny because even Kiss began to realize it to some extent. I mean, they go on this Destroyer tour. They're selling out everywhere. It allows them to go, overseas and stuff like that. They're on television shows. They're featured on the Paul Lynde Halloween special. They're featured on, what is it? Another show I forgot. Oh, they did a couple years prior. They had done like a Dick Clark's in concert type of things like that. So they're now on TV everywhere. People are starting to see who they are. After Paul Lynde's Halloween special, all of a sudden people were exposed to Kiss and like, whoa, this is that band that has makeup and the crazy shows and stuff like that. And people got to see who they were. Destroyer afforded them that because, one, it was a good album. And then two, they released a single, Detroit Rock City, but radio stations don't play it and they flip it over and there's this ballad called Beth on the back. And all of a sudden it took off on radio and became a hit single for them. So now, Peter Criss is basking in the limelight and he's, thinking, haha, I have a hit single, you guys don't. I mean, that's the kind of attitude he was having, about that.
Yeah, he let it go to his head completely.
Yeah, he laid it. And the funny thing is that, if you think about and listen to Paul Stanley talk about it, and even then, he was having issues with Stan Penridge, who the guy who wrote the song. Stan wrote the song. Peter goes, can I get credit? And so Stan's like, yeah, sure, whatever, right? And then Paul has to show Peter how to do some of the stuff in the studio to be able to help do that song properly. So it's a crazy thought, and yeah, it went to Peter's head, and that he had the success, and the band, looked at him was like, yeah, it's one song, dude, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is the moment where things start to break down, right? So,
right, well, things started breaking down during the making of Destroyer. They brought in outside musicians that weren't credited, that did a guitar solo here and did a bass line there, and the things that weren't, like, for as far as Gene and Paul were concerned, yeah, they were involved, so if a bass line would need to be redone, I don't think Gene was completely adverse to it. I think it was just one of those things that just happened. Bob's like, hey, I did it because, you weren't here or whatever, but it was mostly a Peter and Ace problem. And, sort of like when you watch Metallica's home videos, when they were recording the Black Album, and Bob Rock says, well, did you do your homework, Kirk? Did you do your homework on the guitar solo when he was doing, I think, the Unforgiven solo? And he's like, yeah, and he plays the worst solo ever. And I think that's what happened with Ace. It's like, hey, come up with a solo, and Ace is like, yeah, whatever, Curly, and put something out. It was shit, and so someone else did it over.
But
so, yes.
That's where you start not being the band anymore, and you're becoming a product, and that's right. Why. That's what I said earlier, because that's the truth. I mean, they're putting out a Marvel comic. They're and just, we talked about it earlier, but not long from now they're gonna do the Kiss meets the Phantom of the Park. They're putting out merchandise now, and they're becoming a machine.
The years 1976 to 1978 were the most lucrative, I guess, if you want to put it that way, at the time for Kiss. Again, they put out another 3 albums within I think a 15-month span at that point. They put out Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over, and Love Gun. And Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun, they kind of went back to their roots. They pulled in Eddie Kramer to produce. It's very, very raw sounding. I really like the sound of Rock and Roll Over more than Love Gun. But regardless, they have these 3 albums, and then, of course, they then put it together with Kiss Alive 2. And that's where I came into the picture in terms of my Kiss fandom. I saw the commercial, didn't know anything about them, but I saw this commercial with some guy spitting blood and fireworks blowing up everywhere and some guys' guitars just on smoking like crazy. I'm like, I go to my aunt, I go, can you buy me that? I had no idea what the music was. I had no clue whatsoever, but I thought it was the most awesome looking thing I've ever seen at that point in my life, and so I convinced my aunt to buy me this double record. And then not only do I convince her to buy it for me, I force her to listen to it with me. And, she's like, have you ever heard this? I'm like, no, but you're going to listen to it with me. And so she sat down for a while. I mean, the thing only runs an hour front to back, but, she probably listened to like 2 sides with me. And I thought it was the best thing I had ever heard in my life. And from that day forward, I was a Kiss fan. And all things Kiss at that point, Kiss was just all over the place. I mean, they sucked me in, but they were the number one band in America, according to the Gallup poll. They go to Japan, they're breaking attendance records set by the Beatles, 10 years earlier. They've got platinum albums, they've got gold albums, everything is shipping, gold and stuff like that. And the crazy thing about it is there's problems behind the scenes. Now they put Kiss Alive 2 out and they record a studio side 4, and they've got 5 songs. Of the 5 songs, Ace Frehley only plays on 1. And so they have a ghost guitar player. Peter Criss plays drums on it, so I'm pretty sure he plays drums on it. If not, it's someone else. It's just crazy. Now, this is not Kiss anymore, but no one knows it because they're keeping the facade up. And things are starting to spiral. So 78 is when everything kind of went sideways for Kiss. They released the 4 solo albums because Peter and Ace wanted to go solo. So to appease them, they said, let's make solo albums. They released Double Platinum, which is the greatest hits album. It's things were, you're looking at it almost like the end of an era, basically.
That's crazy. I mean, I'm looking at the credits of Alive 2, and it's got Bob Kulick playing lead guitar on All American Man, Rockin' in the USA, and Larger Than Life. So just already in 77, they're having, some of this happen. But you look at the credits of, say, Love Gun, and for the most part, everything is still the band. And wasn't that the first one where Ace Frehley sang? It was on Shock Me, right? So
yeah, he did Shock Me. Now, he was always contributing songwriting. The band asked him to sing, but he just refused.
Yeah, he was nervous and uncomfortable with it.
I mean, he laid down on his back in the middle of the studio to sing the words to Shock Me. Which is, I mean, it's a funny story, but and Shock Me is just an amazing song. I mean, I love the guitar solo in that song. Ace Frehley puts out one of his best guitar solos on that song, and it's one of my favorite Kiss songs to this day.
So I mean, let's talk 78 then. So they do the solo albums, and like I get why they did it, but that's guaranteed to create some dissension because they're gonna have different sales on all of them. Like, you can't expect that everybody that's going to go buy the albums is going to buy all four. People only have so much money, or maybe they like one band member more than the others. They say, I don't really like the way that this guy sings, so I'm going to buy Paul's album, or I'm going to buy Gene's album. So they're going to see this. They're going to see those numbers. Like, to me, this was a horrible idea.
Well, I mean, so you have to look at the other side of the coin, bill of coin. You have a band that you're trying to keep your cash cow together, right?
Yes.
So you're appeasing two members of the band, specifically one, because it was more Ace wanting to do a solo album, because now he feels comfortable. And, he wants to sing and stuff like that. And Peter, he was just, he thought that his shit didn't stink. And oddly enough, his shit stank the worst.
It stank the worst.
So, but, it gives everybody this freedom, and they all did their own thing. Have you listened to those albums, by the way?
I have. When we did one Kiss episode, I don't remember which one, but we ought to do an episode just about these four albums at some point.
Very little time will be spent on Peter.
But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think to me the best one is probably Ace. I like Peter. I mean, Peter's. I like Paul's to some extent, and then I've never been much for Gene. I like a few of his songs, but I tend to like Paul and Ace's voice better when it comes to singing.
Jesus Christ. Ace's album,
Peter, Paul, and Jesus Christ.
Ace's albums is the best of the four.
I think so.
Paul Stanley's album is not that bad. It's really close. I mean, I really, really enjoy Paul's album a lot. There's two songs that I really think are awesome that I would love for them to like incorporate. But when Paul Stanley did his solo tour in 1989, he played a lot of those songs, and he played those two songs that I'm talking about. And one is Tonight You Belong to Me, and the other one is Love in Chains. Those two songs are awesome to me. But Ace's solo album is spectacular. I mean, it just shows off all his songwriting skills, and it's a great album. So Paul and Ace's are really, really close. Ace probably being a little bit higher. Gene Simmons drops off dramatically, but he still has some decent songs. And then Peters is like, it just fell off a cliff. He wanted to do his, his rock and roll from the 60s and stuff like that. And it was all over the place. It was uninspired. I like two songs from that album. The song called I Can't Stop the Rain, which is kind of like a ballad. And then Hooked on Rock and Roll. Oh, no, I'm sorry. 3 songs, because Hooked on Rock and Roll. And then there's Toss It and Turn It, which is a cover. It's not a bad song, but it's, it's been done, and Peter did an okay version, nothing to write home about, but it was done. Is it a bad idea? I agree with you, because, then all of a sudden now Ace Frehley's like, well, shit, mine was the best selling album. I should get more input on the next Kiss album. Peter, was defeated at this point, but he was so far into spiraling into drugs and alcohol, that he didn't really care.
Yeah. He
just thought he was the best guy in Kiss, and he just kept threatening Kiss left and right. I'll quit. Well, Kiss basically said, fuck off, and we go into 1979 with a whole new attitude between all 4 guys.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty huge change. Dynasty, obviously the biggest thing that most fans think of is I Was Made for Loving You. And that's a pretty big deal because, up until that point, they were just a rock band, and then they put out a disco hit.
So here's the thing real quick about that, right? You heard the album.
Yeah.
Okay. The album itself is not a disco album.
No, it's just that one song.
It's the one song. So here's the funny thing. So I'm a kid. I'm 10 years old when this album comes out. And, I was sitting in the front porch of my house in Yonkers, and I'm listening to this album, and people would drive by, or not drive by, excuse me. They would either ride their bike by or they would walk by my house, hear me playing these songs, like, what are you listening to, man? And I'm like, Kiss. And they're like, oh, man, Kiss sucks. They sold out. They're disco now. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, yeah, so what? Right? It's one song. But you can't sit there and get into an argument with a teenager that you don't know and sit there and say, oh, this is just one song. What about X-Ray Eyes? What about Hard Times? What about this song? It's
what
like,
about Hard Times? Nothing wrong.
So it's just one of those things where it's like, what about the rest of the catalog? They're still playing that. It's just a stupid argument. Oh, they turned disco. No, they didn't turn disco. Listen to the album.
You can't make that argument with a lot of people. They just get this one thing in their head, and then that's all it is. But we know the truth. Like, the rest of the album is not disco. However, it did put that imprint in people's heads, and that's why there was that argument.
It was meant to, and it was successful. That song was a disco song. I Was Made for Loving You was a disco song. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. It did what it was supposed to do. It put Kiss, it continued Kiss's success. It put them into a different category of fandom out there where now they've reached across a different aisle. Okay. And they were now being played in nightclubs. There was an extended remix that had longer drums, and that whole digga 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 pattern was going on. So yes, it achieved what it was supposed to achieve. Mm-hmm. And then, the fans just dropped off because the hardcore fans were like, what the fuck is this? And even I said, like, what the fuck is this? But I still liked it. Because I grew up on dance, I grew up on disco, I grew up on R&B from the 70s, so it to me it was still cool.
It's just okay. You look at the songwriting credits or just even the track listing of the first part of the album. You have I Was Made for Loving You, and then 2000 Man, which is a Rolling Stones cover. So you're already like, you start off with a disco track and then a cover. It's kind of a weird way to start things.
It is, but you know what? Me as a kid had no freaking clue that was a Rolling Stones song.
Yeah, granted,
and not a bad song either.
No, it's not. But I can see how somebody might go, well, what are they doing? They have Vinnie Poncia writing on Sure Know Something. Stan Penridge comes back and works with Peter Criss again for Dirty Livin'. It's the only song he plays drums on. Of course, fans don't know that at this point. Anton Fig is playing, all the drums for this. And Anton Fig was the drummer on Ace's album.
Ace Frehley's. Yeah.
So, this is already off to a rough start as far as cohesiveness with this band. Howard Marks writing with Gene Simmons for Charisma, and then finally for the rest of the album, you have a song by Paul. Excuse me. You have a song by Paul Stanley, Ace Frehley, Gene Simmons, and then Ace Frehley. Ace obviously has much more input on this album, so he is indulging more into being part of the band, even though he's, doing more drugs and, living his life the way he wants to live it. He's still at least being part of the band. So Peter's dropping off big time, though, at this point.
Well, Peter's dropping off, and he's, again, spiraling out of control with drugs and alcohol. And, look, the Kiss hires Vinnie Poncia to do the record because they want to appease Peter. And even Vinnie turns around and says, you know what? Peter's not fucking capable of doing this album. We got to get an outside drummer because Peter's not going to cut it. And so that's one of the big reasons why they got Anton. And, with Vinny, the person who was closest to Peter, basically saying, you know what, Peter, you're not worth it. Of course it then made Peter feel even worse, and he's thinking that his shit don't stink because, he had the big hit single just 2-3 years earlier. Yeah. But still, it's one of those things where, It was definitely a decline from the band. And the tour that followed was not that great. Even though it was huge, it was the return of Kiss. Kiss played New York. I remember they played, I think, 3 nights in Madison Square Garden. People were asking me if I was going to go over the summer, because I had friends that were at day camp and they went. But my aunt didn't know anything about concerts and she wasn't about to let me go at 10 years old. So that was a no-go. But, the tour was what it was. And, it solidified the fact that they no longer wanted Peter in the band either. that didn't help.
Yeah, I mean, Dynasty shows that, right? Dynasty comes out and Peter's not on the album. He's credited, but he's not on the album. Right. Vinnie Poncia writes pretty much every song with every member of the band. And then, it's pretty equal, right? With the track listing with Paul Stanley on vocals, Gene Simmons on vocals, and Ace Frehley. So it's really just those 3 guys working with producers at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. I mean, this was Ace's most output. He got 3 songs on it, two originals and 1 cover. Paul's got 3 songs and Gene only had 2. And then there's Peter's song, but Gene's 2 are pretty cool. I mean, I like Charisma and I like X-Ray Eyes, but regardless, it's one of these things where you can see that things change dramatically sound wise. It's a cool sounding record.
You're talking about Dynasty.
Yes. Dynasty. It's a cool sounding record and you could just sense that things are changing for the band because it is so different per se. But the following year, again, you're used to Kiss putting stuff out like every few months, but now, you have this tour and now you have there's rumors of a new album and there's rumors that Kiss is going to unmask because it was like, what's next for Kiss? After this album, now they're disco. So now they've got new fans. What's next? Unmasked is next.
It reminds me of that when I was a kid and I was really into wrestling, and I still enjoy it, but that was the heyday, right? And they had the wrestler Kane, and there was a toy it said, this will reveal the true face of Kane if you buy it, right? And so you buy it, and they unmasked him, and it was a mask underneath. And that's the same.
I wonder where they got that idea from.
Same thing they did with Unmasked.
Yeah. It was weird. So Unmasked. Now, if you listen to Unmasked, I would put that to be more disco-ish than Dynasty.
Yeah,
You listen to songs like Shandy. Shandy is definitely
it's pop rock. Yeah,
it's pop rock. It's danceable. Is That You? It's supposed to be hard, but when you listen to the production, it kind of made it sound danceable. So it was tough because you have this production again from Vinny Poncia, and he's making it sound slick, way too slick. It was disco slick, and it wasn't hard edge. It wasn't like Rock and Roll Over. It wasn't like Love Gun. It was slick, and that's the only way you could put it. You almost feel like if you put your hand through your hair, you're going to get oil on your hair. That's how slick it was. But here now, Peter has nothing to do with this album whatsoever. No songs, no nothing. It's the end of Kiss basically at this point.
Well, during all the what do you call it? Like the press for this album, wasn't this when Peter Criss left or was fired or left the band, and then Eric Carr was on TV, where they introduced him as the new drummer?
Yes. So basically, at this point, they start recording Unmasked. It features 0 contributions from Peter. And the funny thing is the way that the songs were recorded and performed, the individual singer and slash songwriter of the song was the one who performed all the instruments on the song, except for Paul couldn't play drums, but he got Anton to play drums. Peter, no input. Paul, Ace Frehley, he brought all the songs. He played all the parts except for drums. Anton did that. And then Gene, same thing. He played his bass parts. I believe he can play some guitar, but I don't think he's as accomplished as the other guys. So he brought in another guitar player.
So what you're saying, like if Ace had a song, like say "Talk to Me," he did all the parts on that except for the drums?
Yeah, he played the bass, he played the lead guitar, he played the rhythm guitar.
So they're not even a band at this point. They're just...
Exactly. So, Peter is then officially fired on May 18th, 1980, basically right before they were going to go on tour. So they literally scrapped whatever tour they were going to go on because now they have to go find a drummer. Peter made it hard for them to keep him in the band. And so literally they fired a guy and said, okay, by the way, you're fired. Okay, this is going to be your last time with us, but we need you to do this video for us. They did that twice. They did it with Ace Frehley too, but they didn't fire Ace. Ace quit. So Peter's like, okay, I'll do the video. He does the video and leaves. He takes his makeup case and goes. Okay, never to be seen from again until 1995, 96. They do one show in the United States. It's the Palladium show that introduces Eric Carr as a drummer. So they introduce Eric Carr on a TV show called Kids Are People Too, which already that right there tells you Kiss is a completely different thing because it wasn't on the news. It wasn't a press conference. They went on a kids show.
Yeah.
And introduced Eric Carr as their new drummer, the Fox, on a kids show called Kids Are People Too. I watched that show when it aired.
I didn't watch it when it aired, obviously, but I did.
No, you were still in your dad's balls at that point.
Wow. So the way I've heard it is I wasn't even a gleam in my father's eye. Yeah, I didn't watch it then, but I have seen it since. It's on YouTube, and I remember the kids pretty much trying to only ask questions about Peter. Where's Peter? What is Peter doing? And Gene's getting mad and trying to change the subject.
It was a tough one, that's for sure. So they play the one song, the one show at the Palladium in New York City. They got footage from that. Eric Carr's the Fox. He's in makeup, full things. The Kiss tours Europe, Australia, New Zealand, hugely successful. I mean, they were like returning kings when they went to Australia. and that's crazy when because you can see the footage online. It's that was like Beatlemania all over again when Kiss went to Australia. And it was wild. I mean, I have videos from it. There's a concert from it. It's super cool, crazy as all get out. I mean, stage was kind of weird for them, but it was it was like a mix between the Dynasty set and the whole colorfulness of Unmasked and shit like that. So it was a pretty interesting year for them in that regards. But 1981 would be fucking disaster.
I'm assuming you're talking about The Elder.
Yeah, I'm talking about that.
So The Elder is a soundtrack to a movie that doesn't exist, and
yeah,
it's a different one. It's a concept album. It's you have to go in expecting it to be what it is. And if you think of it in that regard, then I think you'll get more out of it. But even then, there's not very many really good songs.
Well,
it's kind of sad that this is.
I disagree with that statement. But go on, finish what you.
I mean, there's a few good songs, like "The World." It was "A World Without Heroes." The Oath itself is not too bad. There was a couple others that I remember, but it's not like super listenable. It's something that you have to think of in a different way when you go into it. And if you approach it as what it is, with knowing that it has a concept behind it, it has an orchestra or at least orchestral elements, like it's okay. It's a progressive rock album. It's something different, but it's not what you would expect from Kiss, at least not at this point.
No, and this is why I say it was a disaster. Besides all those things you just mentioned, so you get interviews in magazines and stuff like that. So they're interviewing Eric Carr. And it's like, all right, so when are you going to make a new album? Oh, we're working on a new album now. It's going to be the hardest rocking album we've done yet. And Paul and Gene say the same thing, right? And that was the original intent. They were supposed to put together a hard rock album. Basically, what Creatures was, that's what they were supposed to do. But then somehow, some way, they got a bug up their ass to do this movie. And so they get this movie and they put together this script and they say, okay, now we're going to do the music for the movie. And they put this Elder thing together. And, as a kid, I go out and I buy this record. And the first thing I notice is it's a different record company. It's a weird thing to notice as a kid. I'm 12 years old. I realize, wait a second, why is this being released on Polygram Records, with the little Casablanca logo in the corner? It's like completely different. So I know that. Then I put it on and I listen to The Oath. It starts off with The Oath. All right, so it's super produced, again by Bob Ezrin. The Oath is not bad. All of a sudden you hear in these falsetto parts from Paul. It's not a bad song. But then it goes into this interlude, and I Am Just a Boy. Like, what the hell is this? It throws you off. I am just a boy. I mean, it's just like, what?
Yeah, one of the shows, I mentioned this to you the other day, but there was a cartoon called Home Movies, which I was a huge fan of when I was younger, but it had a lot of parodies of movies and stuff like that. And there's a song in there that completely parodies Just a Boy. And I didn't know that until way later when I listened to this album and I was like, oh, I get it. No.
So here's my thing. Dark Light is a good song. The Oath is a good song.
That one's cool.
World Without Heroes is a good ballad. I is a good song. It's one of the few songs where Paul and Gene trade vocals, sort of like shouted out loud. The one thing I can say about the record, and this reveals a lot about how I deal with music. This is why I can listen to Saint Anger and still like it. because I take the band out of it. You want to put it that way? Like I don't listen to it say, oh, this is Kiss. I listen to it as, what am I listening to? Does it sound good? Do the vocals sound good? Are the lyrics good? Are the, is the music good in general? And I think as an overall product, it is okay. It's not the best. It's okay. It has some good highlights and it has some lowlights. So then you sit there and you slap Kiss on it and you're like, whoa, hold on a second. What do you mean this is Kiss? I mean, not like I don't know what Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons and Ace Frehley sound like, right? But it's like, what do you mean this is Kiss?
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Okay. And so when you take the Kiss out of it, it's not horribly bad. I've heard worse. Okay. When you put Kiss back into it and you're like, what are you doing? Why is this happening? That's where the disconnect comes from, and the decisions behind it is just like, what made you think that after you've fired your drummer and you bring in this young guy who blows Peter Criss out of the water a million times, what makes you think you're going to put together a freaking soundtrack for a freaking movie? This is why we're having this conversation. The decisions that this band made throughout the years is freaking puzzling and mind-boggling. Some worked, some didn't.
This one was sheer ego. I mean, honestly, they thought that they could put together a movie with a movie soundtrack, and didn't have the foresight to have any of the movie done. Like, it's the complete opposite of what you would typically do. It's the complete opposite. Like, yeah, like sometimes songs were made for movies, but they usually have an idea of what they're doing. Like, this one was not good.
No, it wasn't.
And it's kind of sad that like this was the first album for Eric Carr to me, because it's not a good start, and obviously this is what kind of leads to Ace leaving, and I think Ace and Ace and Eric could have had, a good relationship in this band had they not gone in this direction, maybe gone towards like Creatures of the Night instead.
Here's the crazy part about that, right? They had no choice but to promote the shit out of it.
Yeah.
Right? They released this and they've got no choice but to do promotion. They were everywhere. They were in every single teeny bopper magazine you could think of. They were in every single music magazine you could think of. Their pictures, the photo shoots, I don't know how long the photo shoots lasted, but the pictures are endless from these photo shoots. Endless. Okay? To this day, there's still fucking pictures coming out that people haven't seen. And they were everywhere. And then all of a sudden, now they're on Casey's Top 10 with The World Without Heroes, the video. I mean, they're putting out videos before MTV existed at this point. Okay. And World Without Heroes is one of those videos. They're on Casey's Top 10. For those who don't know, Casey Kasem was an old DJ who had, Casey's America's Top 40, a radio show every weekend. And then he put a TV show, which was the top 10 version of that top 40. And he would highlight bands and play videos during the show. I think it was an hour long, doing 10 songs. It was pretty cool. I mean, but that was the kind of thing that you did back then. They had Solid Gold, which was a disco show. They're putting World Without Heroes on that. And then they had Fridays, which was basically, I think, a Canadian version of Saturday Night Live. On Friday nights, it was a live, comedy skit show, just like SNL. And Kiss was the featured band on this show. They played 3 songs from the album live. It was legit live. And they did some stupid comedy routine with the people in the audience. That like they brought in this old couple, probably in their late 60s, early 70s, and they were supposed to be like the hugest Kiss fans that would follow the band from all over the country. It was just watching them read off the teleprompter. It was hilarious. But, they played the songs live. They promoted the shit out of this for nothing because 3 months later, the album's dead in the water and they've got nothing.
Pretty much, right? Like so much effort for so little payoff.
There was no payoff whatsoever. Nothing. So the band has to, what do we do now? Well, what do we do now is they were told they need to come up with a fucking album.
Talk to me about Killers, because I don't know a whole lot about that. So Killers is in between Creatures of the Night and Music from the Elder. I want to say at this point, Ace Frehley is still in the band, right?
Yes, Ace Frehley is still in the band at this point. The songs, there was 4 songs. Basically, this is a greatest hits album that came out in Europe it came out internationally, Europe and Japan, nothing in the United States. 4 new songs. There was basically the record company, their international record company, Phonogram, wanted them to kind of restart their career, kickstart it all over again and say, hey, you failed at this, so let's get back to what you know.
So it was kind of making up for the Elder. Okay.
Trying to, yeah. So, Phonogram, that the record company is kind of like, all right, so we're putting out a greatest hits. They edited the songs, some of the songs. I mean, they edited out all the intro to Detroit Rock City. So when you listen to Detroit Rock City, it goes straight to the guitar solo. I mean, not the solo, the guitar intro. There's no keys. And it's funny because it's like when you listen to it on Destroyer, it builds, it kind of fades in. No, this one starts off full blast. So it's kind of cool because you don't have to listen to the 2 minutes of Gene doing a fake news report. And then, the car driving, all that's gone. But it's funny, you can hear the car in the background during the parts of the song that have the car in it, or the truck, or whatever you want to call it. So then the end is also, a real quick kind of end. There's a couple of mixes. I don't know why they constantly remix shit during their greatest hits albums. But anyway, Killers, I didn't know about Killers for years. And then all of a sudden, I hear there's a Japanese import, and I'm like, hey, where did these 4 songs come from? But yeah, that was what it was. It was basically a way for the record company to get Kiss's name back out there in a positive light, but it was only internationally. So in the United States, there was nothing. Kiss Killers, in Japan was pretty popular, and those 4 songs were pretty good. I mean, they're typical Kiss kind of songs, Down on Your Knees, Nowhere to Run, I'm a Legend Tonight, and Partners in Crime. Partners in Crime, probably the weakest song out of the 4. I like Down on Your Knees, and I like I'm a Legend Tonight. And Nowhere to Run's catchy. Partners in Crime is just the worst out of the 4. But I bought it. I had to find. I saw it was an import, so it was like $15. Most records were $9. This was 15, some places 20. And if you were depending on the importer, some of them were the German imports with the funky S that Kiss had for the German releases.
Yeah, to avoid
but I ended up getting, I think my Killers is a German and my CD is Japanese.
Interesting. Okay.
So that is the story behind Killers. And if I'm not mistaken, Ace is not on it.
So it says he was on the album, lead guitar, vocals, acoustic guitar on Shandy, all guitars and bass on Talk to Me, but that's it.
Those are all the so I guess, if he's on the 4 songs. Okay, so Bob Kulick played lead guitar on I'm Legend Tonight on the 4 songs.
Yeah.
So
Ace is only on
Ace
the
is not
older
on the
stuff, yeah.
Right, Ace is on basically the greatest hits stuff, which is all stuff that he was already on to begin with.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Bob Kulick plays guitar, all the lead guitars. Obviously, Paul Stanley's doing all the rhythm guitars on everything. Anton Fig. No, well, Eric Carr was a drummer. Anton Fig only just played the stuff that was on Dynasty and Unmasked. So yeah, it was kind of interesting. Oh yeah, God of Thunder also without the intro, so it didn't have the little kiddie part with the high vocals. It was an interesting release to say the least about it.
So I guess it takes us into Creatures of the Night. And Creatures of the Night is really good.
Creatures is fantastic. What do you think about Creatures in that whole time period?
So, I mean, I think the mixing's really good. This obviously shows off how good of a drummer Eric Carr was. I mean, I think he's the only member of the band that actually appears on every song. I mean, we talked about it, some of this stuff, like Creatures of the Night itself, is a really good song. I think it has only Eric Carr on drums and Paul Stanley on vocals, and all the other instrumental parts are played by other people. That's one that Vinnie Vincent's not even on. Obviously, this is Vinnie Vincent's first recording effort with the band, but he's not credited. Ace Frehley is still credited as lead guitarist, but they've got, gosh, what's the guy's name? There's a guitarist that appears on Creatures of the Night.
Well, there's Robin Ford, the blues guitarist. Steve Ferris plays lead guitar on Creatures.
That's right.
Mike Porcaro plays bass on Creatures.
Yes.
So it's crazy. Adam Mitchell plays additional guitar on Creatures and the end guitar lick, which is kind of weird. Like, so you get this one guy just going, that's literally
That's it. Yeah.
I mean, not even Vinny's on Creatures of the Night, the song.
Yeah. But he appears on most
yeah.
of the songs on the album, and he's not an official member of the band at this point, but this is one of the 2 albums that has him as a member.
He's still Vincent Cusano at this point.
Oh, okay. He wasn't Vinnie Vincent at this point?
He wasn't Vinnie Vincent at this point. I mean, you see it on Wikipedia. It says Vincent as his last name, but all the credits go to Cusano.
Oh, okay.
So he wasn't. So at this point, he's not known to the Kiss army or to the Kiss fandom at all. I mean, everybody, all they see when this album comes out, they see this really cool cover with these glowing eyes, and then they see Ace Frehley on the cover. They see Ace Frehley on the video for I Love It Loud, and he's doing promotional stuff, and they even have him in his elder outfit playing guitar on some stuff. But then when they go to do some European promotional stuff, Ace Frehley's nowhere to be found because he was gone at that point. So they just said he was sick and he couldn't appear.
Wow.
Yeah, basically. So Vinnie Vincent doesn't really appear until they go on tour. So promotionally, there's it's all Ace Frehley, even though he doesn't play a damn lick on the album.
That's so interesting because it's like you're gaslighting the fans, and I hate using that word, but it really is like you're tricking the fans into thinking that this is a cohesive unit and Ace is here and he's part of the band, and then they go on tour, he's not there. He's not a member.
It is the weirdest thing because I lived through that, and it's very odd. You don't, and especially because there's no internet back then. So this is 1982. So there's no internet. There's, computers were for IBM and rocket scientists. That stuff is not on our radar. And I'm 13 years old when this comes out. I just became a teenager, and your favorite band finally comes back with a rockin' album. And you hear this album, and when you listen to it, it's very cohesive. It's done extremely well in terms of the songs blend into each other. You don't get this idea that it's recorded here, recorded there. You don't get this idea that all these parts are basically jumbled together. It's very slick production. Michael James Jackson was the producer, did a great job. But you know, you don't know this as a fan. You don't know that Ace is gone. You don't even hear rumors at this point. You know, it's just weird.
Because they did a really good job of presenting it like they were together.
A unified unit. Yeah, I get it. You know, but it's one of those things where it's like, who's this guy with this gold cross on his face? You know,
that is the one thing that I have to say. Vinny had the worst makeup of the whole group. Well, even worse than Peter Criss's first album cover version of the cat. Like the Ankh Warrior was bad.
Well, so you got an Ankh Warrior. What does Ankh mean, right?
I mean, it's an Egyptian symbol.
It's a symbol.
I can't remember specifically what it means, but
it's a symbol. And to me, you know, it's a symbol, and then
it's
so
the
he has
key
a symbol
of life is the symbol meaning.
Right. So an Ankh Warrior, it was probably the worst thing that they could come up with. But I bet you anything, 99% of that was Vinnie Vincent saying, "This is what I want to be." Fine.
Probably. I would think so. I know, like, after Vinny leaves the band or is fired, right? Then it becomes really, truly the Paul and Gene show. You know, you watch the music videos, they don't focus on the other band members hardly at all after that point, because it's like they feel like they've been screwed around, I guess. You know, you have Ace gone, you have Peter gone, Vinny's gone, you know, at this point, and it's like we're the only really like continuous members of the band. So you watch like the video for Tears Are Falling, and you see Bruce Kulick like in the background pretty much. You never really see the camera focus on him. You almost never see Eric, and it's just the two of them back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I know I'm getting kind of ahead of myself on this one, but like, yeah, I think that's one of the things that happen. You have these constant changes, and then the mindset of Paul and Gene changed, and it's like, this is our product. Yeah, everybody else is just along for the ride.
Well, I mean, in a way, it's kind of weird to say it this way. In a way, they don't have a choice. You are now, Paul and Gene are now the partnership. They are Kiss. The other two guys are now hired guns. Eric is contracted. You know, mind you, he's a permanent member. Maybe
he has like the best attitude when it comes to being a member of that band too. Like he wants to be part of Kiss.
Absolutely.
He genuinely wants to be part of Kiss and contribute as much as he can.
Right, and that's the sad part too when you go along, because he was so into it, but yet they barely ever did anything with him. They didn't take a lot of his contributions other than his playing. I mean, his playing was amazing, but songwriting wise, I mean, unless they just didn't think it was good enough, and we don't know that backstory whatsoever. But he only had, I think, 2 songwriting credits the entire time that he was in Kiss.
Yeah.
So, and he only sang one time, which was on Hot in the Shade. You know, so you're not. I don't even think you're getting ahead of yourself, because there's that's all that whole 80's thing. So let's all right. We got to this point right here, right? We went from Unmasked and into The Elder. So let's look at it this way: 70's Kiss, obviously put Kiss on the map. That's how they became a household name. To me, 70's Kiss was 1974 to 1978. I kind of jumble Dynasty and Unmasked together. That was kind of like 1980, if I want to look at it that way. So like when 78 was done and the solo albums came out, that was the end of that era. It is absolutely definitive, you know, dividing line between that era and what comes next. And the decisions that were made in the 70s were all, for the most part, very good decisions. It brought the band the success that they needed to bring. And the success is what kind of steered Kiss down the wrong path, which is where we're at now. Agree? Disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The success, like that Alive to Destroyer period, is the turning point for that band. From being a cohesive unit that all is just trying to become successful and trying to kind of like find their footing, to pretty much not overnight success, but like a massive leap forward, I guess. And then there's just a distinctive change where, you know, the members they have success, they have money, and they don't have that cohesiveness. There's no hunger to get there anymore. They're just there, and they're indulging in every indulgence they can find.
Yeah.
And the mindset of Ace and Peter was so drastically different than what Paul and Gene were, who were trying to reach that next step. I mean, Gene is not long for this being his only pursuit. Like he would move on to trying to become an actor, you know, and he's still always trying to reach that next level. So he's still trying to find success, where Ace and Peter were like, we found it, let's enjoy it, you know? And that's the difference. And that's that mindset. When you listen to the interviews with these guys, there's this drastic difference in mindset where it's like, we were the band, we were the guys, you know? And Paul is always like, I'm trying to find that next level. I'm an artist. I don't have time to sit on my laurels. And I think that's the big difference. That's what the difference between the 70s and the 80s is, for sure.
So the other thing the way I look at it too is the 80s Kiss. When you think about 80s Kiss, you define it as the Unmasked era, okay? And 80s Kiss really is, you know, 80s 83 through 92. During the revenge portion, to me, I like to include Creatures of the Night in 80s Kiss, and it should be included in 80s Kiss because it's 80s. But I look at Dynasty, Unmasked, and The Elder as like lost. That was the lost period for Kiss. When I think of 70s Kiss, I think of, you know, Kiss through Alive 2.
Okay.
You know, that's just the way I see it.
I kind of think of it more in like Kiss through Alive, and then Destroyer through Alive 2.
Right, I mean, those two periods of time. But
yeah.
When I just look at 70s Kiss in general, like when you say, oh, 70s Kiss versus 80s Kiss, I look at 74 through 78. I don't even think about 79, 80, and 81. Right? And then 80s Kiss, I look at it as, you know, Creatures to Revenge, you know, because that's really what it is. It's that 10-year period right there. So, and it's funny because you got 10 years of that, right? And then you only have literally 4 years, maybe even 3.5 of what happened. I mean, think about that in your mind. It's 4 years and mostly just 3. 74, 75, so it's 4 years. 75, 76, 74, excuse me. 75, 76, and 77. Because they didn't do shit in 78 other than the movie. Those 4 years were, I mean, blazing fast.
Yeah. And I think that's what sits in the minds of a lot of people, because I mean, there was so
crazy.
Much in that short period of time.
It's insane how much shit happened in that time.
Yeah.
You know, today, if that same thing would have happened to Kiss today, and that first album's a failure, and that second album's a failure, they're done. They're dead in the water.
Pretty much, yeah.
You know, that's just amazing to think of. No one's going to spend that time. But what's funny is it's not. They didn't even spend time. When you think about how fast it was like, you know, the first album comes out, they do some promotional stuff, and album's not selling. All right, we need you to make another record. Nowadays, they try to get as much out of you as possible, but if that second record doesn't do anything, you're done. So, Kiss and Hotter Than Hell, that would have been it for Kiss A. Mind you, in today's standards, that would have lasted 2 years, 2 full, complete years, maybe even 3.
Maybe 3, yeah.
You know, but back then, you were talking 3 albums in 13 months. Think about that. And then the next 3 albums in 15 months. It's insane.
I mean, because, we've talked about that before. You don't go on press tours back then. It's not the same. Now, it's like a whole machine that has to keep going, right? So,
well, you went on press tours back then, but they weren't these.
It wasn't the same
long
thing. Yeah,
no, it's not the same. So, when you said you were jumping ahead, I don't really look at it as jumping ahead because that whole period of time, Creatures comes out, but it doesn't do anything. In reality, it was mildly successful, but not necessarily the success that the band was thinking that they were going to get from such a very strong album. It wasn't until the next year and the events of that next year that things changed for the band.
And that would be Lick It Up, right?
Yeah.
So Lick It Up, I guess, is the first album with Vinnie Vincent fully as a member. The fans see, who these guys are. They drop the makeup. So they had the Ankh Warrior for only just a short amount of time. So fans of the Ankh Warrior lament, So, it's a big difference.
Those were the good old days of the Ankh Warrior.
The good old days. But realistically, it's very different. You're dropping your whole mystique at this point and saying, here we are. These are our faces. We're a different band, essentially. That's huge. What did you, like, you lived through it, so what did you think at that time?
I thought, damn, these motherfuckers are ugly. It was quite a surprise, but it was something that, obviously had been hinted at since 1980, even though it technically was never truly being hinted at. It was quite the surprise. I was happy to see that it happened, but at the same time, you don't know why it's happening. You just know that your favorite band is dropping the makeup, and they said, we're going to let the music stand for itself. And they did. And Look It Up was a damn strong album. I really wish that Creatures of the Night, I don't know, it couldn't happen without the without the makeup. It had to have the makeup on it. But I wish that they didn't have the makeup so people could see how good that album was. Because it got buried on the fact that people didn't like Kiss anymore. It was an old act. So now
it lost some of the steam, some of the mystique by that point. And Elder probably didn't help things. The people that were holding on were losing steam, and then they put out another rock album where they're still wearing the makeup, and it doesn't push the needle at all. But then this does. This is surprising.
And that's the thing is, it should have pushed the needle, because that's a really good album.
No, I agree, but it didn't. Like, that's the reality of it. And so them taking off the makeup, putting out a really good album, Vinnie Vincent was huge here, realistically, because the album really benefited from him coming in and writing a lot of the songs. At this point, Gene is kind of starting to check out. So him coming in and giving that fresh take on things, and obviously the tour that followed didn't go very well, and Vinnie Vincent would end up getting fired. But at that time, he was integral into keeping the band alive.
I agree. If it's not for Vinnie Vincent, Kiss, the songs are not what they are. And I give him that. He is a great songwriter. It's unfortunate he couldn't he couldn't apply that to his own band. But for Kiss, he was a great songwriter, and the songs that he put on Creatures, the songs that he put on Lick It Up, are outstanding.
Well, I think the problem is that Vinnie Vincent and Paul Stanley wrote together a lot, right? I mean, most of the songs on the album have the two of them as credit. So he didn't have, when he did his solo stuff, he didn't have Paul there to kind of edit. He didn't have him to keep him in check. And so those songs are a little bit overblown. They're a little bit overdone. It's like the same kind of mentality as Peter Criss to some degree. Like, he needed somebody to humble him and keep him in check. So, I think they worked well together. It's just Vinnie Vincent's tour behavior was not very good, and that affected him. Yeah.
No, his live stage behavior was just a little questionable. Yeah, but I mean, it's unfortunate. He basically, I mean, for lack of a better term, he's a very arrogant guitar player, but he has all the reason in the world to be, because he can play a million notes a second, and that's great. I mean, this is the era of the shredding guitarist. George Lynch is now coming and becoming popular. Eddie Van Halen has already been popular. The 80's scene is blowing up in LA at this point. Everybody is starting to become famous, and shredding guitars is what it's all about. And Vinnie Vincent was at the forefront of that. Unfortunately, his attitude was horrible and did not allow he has zero humility, and that's really the biggest stumbling block in this whole thing, because songwriting is great. He has a great partnership with Paul and Gene in terms of songwriting, but the arrogance and the lack of humility is what did him in. And we go on to the next album, and they need to find another guitar player again. And so to try and keep in with the times, they get another shredder who has no idea how to replicate a guitar solo.
Yeah, he does it one time and can't do it again. And so that's fine for Ritchie Blackmore, but it doesn't work for working with Gene and Paul.
No, and we're talking about Mark St. John, and we're talking about the Animalize album. So they progressed from Lick It Up, very successful album. They progressed to Animalize, but at this point now, Gene is completely checked out. He took the makeup off. Now, he feels the sense that he can become a movie star because he's got the freedom of not having to worry about being seen in public without his makeup.
I hate to say it, but he was really wrong about that. I saw one movie with him.
Runaway?
And I'm trying to remember. What's that?
Runaway with Tom Selleck?
Yes. And it was not good. I mean, it wasn't a bad movie, per se.
But it wasn't a good one either.
It wasn't a good one either. If you want to see a movie with the most, rudimentary idea of what robots are, like a fax machine chasing after you, that's what you're getting out of this movie. It also has the most hilarious ending where the main character and his love interest kiss, and it spins around for 3 minutes where they're just sitting there kissing for 3 minutes, and it's so awkward. But I just had to say that because every time I have to mention this movie, that's the part that it's so cringy that it's hilarious.
Isn't this the one where Gene Simmons dies in a big giant pile of cocaine?
He dies falling off of a building, and then the robots attack him. Oh, okay. If I remember correctly.
I forgot which one it was that he dies in a big pile of cocaine.
He's not horrible in the movie. It's just it's not good either. So it's somewhere in between.
The thing with Gene Simmons, he considers himself extremely good looking, and
He's got the confidence.
He's got the he's got the confidence. I mean, God, how do you put it? I mean, he's not like butt ugly, okay, but he's not the most handsome man in the world. He's not leading man good looks. He doesn't have the Tom Selleck good looks. He doesn't have the Tom Cruise good looks. But he can act.
He doesn't even have the Steve Buscemi good looks.
Oh wow, no, he's better than Buscemi. Come on. But the problem is that, you know, he thinks he does. And so he's trying to do all these projects and you know, rather than just focus on the fact of what got you there, he's trying to do everything else. Now, you flip it towards Paul Stanley. Paul Stanley is doing everything in his power to make sure that Kiss survives. Okay, and so now he's taking the helm, but he's taking the helm with a sense of not regret. He has no choice but to give credit where credit is not due to Gene Simmons. You know, Gene Simmons was listed as an associate producer to Animalize. He was considered a producer on Asylum, and even though he had nothing to do with it, the songwriting was just like, oh yeah, here's a song I wrote yesterday. And even Paul Stanley, when you listen to him talk in his book, and I listened to the audiobook, he does not believe that Gene Simmons wrote those songs. He believes that Gene took them from other artists and put his name on it.
But Paul was humble and did the right thing in order to keep the band together by... He unfortunately gave him credit for things that he didn't really do, but that was the smart thing at the time to make sure that Kiss survived.
I think, yeah, and it was in order to keep the Kiss machine alive. You know, it was kind of like, this guy has, you know, my partner has me by the balls. He's got a gun to my head. I have no choice but to do this, or otherwise the machine just falls apart. And it's fucked up on Gene's part, and he finally called him out on it. And he's like, "Look, dude, you either are in or you're out. I can't keep doing this." And yeah. Gene kind of woke up to it, you know. But I, at the same time, and I'll give this in Gene's defense. When Gene took the makeup off, Gene didn't know who Gene was anymore.
It's understandable.
Gene became an actor in Hollywood, but that wasn't Gene Simmons. That wasn't the demon. So now, who is Gene Simmons? He's this guy with short hair, because his hair never grew back until late 80s and 90s. After, you know, keeping it short for Hollywood ever since 1981 when he cut it for The Elder. You know, Gene Simmons' hair never really grew back until, you know, you saw it on Hot in the Shade, and then on Revenge. It was probably the best look he ever had post makeup. So he didn't know who he was. He was literally lost between trying to be a Hollywood star and not knowing the music was not coming out of him. And so if you listen to all the Kiss albums in the 80s, you know, specifically stuff on Animalize, Asylum, Lick It Up. Well, Lick It Up has some good songs, but Animalize, Asylum, Hot in the Shade, Crazy Nights, none of those 4 albums have a good Gene song on it. Maybe Crazy Nights, because I think that's when Paul finally said, "Hey, dude, I need you. What are you doing?" And so Gene actually made some effort. The songs still weren't great, but he made an effort. You know, Paul Stanley had all the singles, had every single on those 4 albums.
Those are definitely the Paul albums. You know, you look at them and you think about each song that's on. Like you said, those are the Paul albums. Those are the ones that he stands out as the leader of the band.
Absolutely. You know, and during this time, by the way, you find out, or Paul finally, you know, in his autobiography tells you they were getting screwed by their finance manager. They were managing themselves, even though they had someone who was a consultant. So all the decisions were going through Paul, basically. That, Paul had to get Gene to sign off on it, but basically Gene was going to do whatever Paul told him to do. So it's crazy, this period of time that we're thinking is successful for Kiss because they're all over MTV. They've got a hit single with Reason to Live. They got a hit single with Forever. You're seeing them all over MTV every year because shit, Asylum and Animalize come out 12 months apart to within 3 days of a year. Crazy Nights comes out 2 years later, almost to the day. And then, Hot in the Shade comes out 2 years later, I think it is, to the day, almost to the next month. It's like whatever it is, 25 months later. It's insane that this is all Paul's doing. It's all, and you're thinking they're having all this success, and in the background you got a guy who is trying really, really hard, like a parent, to keep it together, and to keep the machine rolling and to keep making money.
Yeah.
So, 1991 comes around. So they've got these 4 albums. They've had some success, but the ticket sales the success is not showing in ticket sales, which is kind of weird because they're having this big success with a song like Forever, which is a top 10 hit, a song like Reason to Live, which was a top 40 hit. And I think, or was that like top 60 something? But it still made the Hot 100. And you have a band that, can't sell out an arena, even though they're all over MTV. It's kind of weird, Yeah. So 1989 comes around. Paul Stanley decides to do a solo tour. Then they come out with Hot in the Shade, and they have these really good tours. I mean, I saw all the tours since Asylum on. Asylum, Crazy Nights, Hot in the Shade, Revenge, then the reunion stuff, the acoustic stuff. I saw all that. And every show was great. As a Kiss fan, you're loving this stuff. But in the background, they're not doing that well. 3-month tour. When you have an album, you figure you got to do more than 3 months, and U.S. only. It's kind of like, man, that's it. And in 91, or I think in 91 time, Eric Carr gets diagnosed with cancer. Cancer spreads. He passes away the same day that Freddie Mercury passes away. I think it was November 24th or something like that, 23rd, 1991. And he is a footnote because Freddie Mercury passes away the same day. I mean, everybody was about Freddie. And, MTV News, and also Eric Carr passes away. And it was like, for me, that was more devastating than Freddie Mercury.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, they had released the song "God Gave Rock and Roll to You Too" from the Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey soundtrack. So that got them started to make another album, which would eventually become Revenge. Here's the funny part about Revenge. Some dude named Vincent Cusano reemerges and apologizes to Paul and Gene. They do songs together, and they came out with a pretty good freaking album called Revenge. And Gene Simmons figured out who the hell he was. Why? Because Unholy fits the demon character. Don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is the first album to me after probably Creatures that is really heavy and really like what's the word? Cohesive. It feels like Kiss has their shit back together.
But what's weird is Unholy doesn't fit the rest of the album. But yet it fits,
Yeah, I mean, because it has some heavy moments, but yeah, it does feel a little different.
See, I mean,
it's
Bob
kind of Kiss to me. Is like they're always a little all over the place. That's part of it because they have multiple members singing, etc. So there's kind of like at this point it's just Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, right? I don't think anybody else sang on this album.
No.
But maybe even going forward, right? I think it's pretty much just the two of them, except for with the reunions.
After this, they released. They started doing the Carnival of Soul sessions, and actually Bruce Kulick sings one song on there.
Oh, okay. I've never really listened to that one too much because it's so very different.
Yeah, it's so different. It's very odd. But Bruce Kulick does do a song on there. They give him that. But then, of course, Psycho Circus comes out a year after that one. And
that's a whole
Carnival of
story.
Souls was supposed to be more along the lines of grunge.
Yeah.
And it was funny because, they're trying to do this grunge album. They get a grunge producer. And, Paul's like, dude, I can't sing songs about being upset and angry when I'm not upset and angry.
Yeah, right.
He goes, that's just not me. And Gene's like, no, just right. And Gene's like, just try it. I'm sure you can do it, And Gene comes up with a song called Hate, which is perfect for Gene because Gene's an angry dude. He looks angry, and that's why Unholy works. But, the other stuff, Paul's not an angry guy. He's about rock and roll and getting laid,
Yeah. I don't really ever remember seeing like a happy picture of Gene Simmons.
Because he's always trying to be evil,
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That Revenge was real good. Vinnie Vincent reemerges and then does the same stupid shit. He decides to renege on his deal. He wants more money. He sues Kiss for more money, and Kiss takes him back to court, and they basically slam dunk him, back down to the fucking wherever he lives in Connecticut for him to hold himself up for the next 20 years. Until he reemerged. It is too bad. It's too bad. Vinnie Vincent just kind of went weird, and he reemerged in 2018. And again, Gene Simmons had wanted nothing to do with him, but he reemerges. He comes out of his hole, and he decides he wants to play guitar again. He gets back on stage with Gene during Gene's little vault solo tour that he's trying to do and sell this $1,000 box set. And he reunites with Ace for a couple of these, personal performances. And he reunites with Vinnie Vincent for one personal performance. And then Vinnie Vincent goes on Eddie Trunk. And he's trying to do all these expo shows. And then he just backs out on everything again and just disappears.
Now, he had some other stuff that happened, though. Like his wife was murdered.
But that was before. I mean, that was part of the reason why he stayed reclusive.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
right.
part of him withdrawing from life was he had some bad stuff happen to him too. So
right, but at the same time,
you can't just live on that. But I'm just putting it out there so people understand. Right. Yeah.
So we've gotten to this point. 80's Kiss, like I mentioned, to me is from Creatures all the way to Revenge. For me, it's an incredible time period that sees a resurgence of Kiss. My favorite band is now back on top, even though that's the way it looks like to me. In the background, that's not the way it was happening, and it's kind of tough when you hear about it later. You're like, wow, man, all this shit was going on, but Paul Stanley did his best to keep it together. He's like a single mom, trying to keep it together.
He's the soccer mom of Kiss.
But unfortunately, that's what happened. And this is a guy who was motivated by wanting to be successful in his band that he put together. Chris Jericho is a bigger fan of 80's Kiss than he is of 70's Kiss because that's what he grew up on. That's what I grew up on. But I started in the 70's. I'm a few years older than Chris, and he came into liking Kiss in the middle of the 80's. I started liking Kiss as a kid. And I know you are way behind all that, and you're catching up on it. But having lived through it, it's understandable. I mean, I have two different, like I look at Kiss as two different entities, 70s and 80s Kiss kind of thing. And Reunion Kiss, I completely disagree. We're going to talk about that in a second. So I really enjoyed 80s Kiss, the Creatures Through Revenge Kiss. I really, really enjoyed it. That's when I got to see them in concert and stuff like that. So that was a really cool time for me.
It does seem like, even from my perspective, which is, relatively new in getting to know Kiss as a band, it does seem like two completely different bands, and that's kind of what made me think about this as a concept for an episode, was because, like I said, listening to these guys talk about it was, Peter and Ace have this mindset of those 4 or 5 years as the band, and they didn't live through Paul trying to keep the band together and them having to figure out how they were gonna keep the band alive with replacing members, and how are people going to react to that, and living through the hard times of you're going from being on top of the world to barely selling out your shows, or sometimes not even selling out your shows. And it's a different mindset. It's a different experience. And you have these guys that think of the band in one way, and then you have the two guys that have stuck it out through the entire career. And then you have the other members, like, say, for instance, an Eric Carr or Bruce Kulick, who were, hired guns essentially, but still very devoted to the band in the time that they were in the band. And then you have other guys. Now you have Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer, who are, they've been in Kiss longer than Ace and Peter were, and yeah, they're playing their parts, but that's the role that they were hired for. And so, like, you have these very distinct eras. Like you said, there's 70s Kiss and 80s Kiss, but you can even break it down further to the Hungry 8 years, those first 4 or 5 years, first 3 albums, and then everything from after Alive to Alive 2 is its own kind of distinct era. And then you have, pretty much from what, Elder to Revenge, in a way, is its own era, because that's kind of Paul's saga, really. It's Gene was there too, but he was doing his own thing, and you have to think of it almost as a separate entity than Kiss, because he was trying to make Gene Simmons successful. So it's a really interesting thing. And then we're about to get into the Reunion era briefly, but it's really interesting to see, because it's not just Masked versus Unmasked. There's so much more in between.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with you on all that. So 1995 rolls around, and Kiss is, at this point, they've finished the Revenge tour. They're doing side projects, and I put it that way. Tribute albums are becoming a thing. So they put together Kiss My Ass, the tribute album to Kiss. There's a home video that goes along with it. There's the CD and album, limited edition vinyl. They've put out a couple of other videos, home videos in the past couple of years leading up to that point. So they've gotten their name continuing. Kiss Alive 3 came out in 1993. So they've gotten their name still out there. But 1995 rolls around, and they've heard about these Kiss conventions, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we want a piece of that. So basically they put a cease and desist on all these expos using the Kiss convention name. They can't use Kiss convention, because now Kiss is going to do their own Kiss convention. And it's a really cool idea, what they did and the concept behind it and everything like that. And it's crazy expensive. You want to get into this Kiss Expo, their own Kiss convention. It's $100 in 1995. Now, I am piss broke as a human being in 1995.
Me too.
You know, so I mean, I'm working at the record store. I'm a store manager.
I was 9.
I was not. I was a lot older. I was 1995. I was 26 years old. I have my own store, and I'm asked, do you want to work this show? And this is Specs Music. So anybody who lives in Houston knows Specs is a liquor store here in Houston. But in Florida, Specs was a record store for a long time. And so Specs Music was the official retailer for the music for the Kiss conventions. There was one in Miami. I think there was one in Tampa. And so they asked me if I wanted to work the show. So I'm like, I don't have to spend $100 and I can get into the show and we can take breaks and walk around. Sure. Shit. Yeah. I'm going to do that. So that's what I did. So there was 4 of us. So it was me and another store manager, and we were able to pick 2 employees, and both of the employees came from my store. So we these Kiss conventions were so super cool. It was basically a traveling museum. They had their own Kiss memorabilia that they set up so people could view it, and then they had special Kiss merchandise that was available for sale, and then they had a Kiss tribute band perform, which was kind of weird. If I'm Kiss, that's kind of got to be really weird because you're watching yourself like from some band do you 10 years prior.
Hey, it's got to feel like Ace Frehley now.
Yeah, so exactly with Tommy Thayer.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're talking 1995. There's a Kiss tribute band is doing them from 20 years prior. So it was pretty cool. And then they came out and they did an acoustic set, which was supposed to be quote unquote all request, which it really wasn't. They had a set amount of songs that they were going to play acoustically, and they did like 1 or 2 songs by request. And some of those songs were usually done after a minute because it couldn't remember everything.
So you're telling me Kiss did something where they were tricking the fans into thinking something different than what was actually there? They had never done that before.
No, they didn't. And then there was the free-for-all autograph session, which is where I got my autographs from. And that's how I met Paul and Gene in the back. Paul, Gene, Eric Singer, and Bruce Kulick. It was pretty cool. I had a good time. They signed my record for Revenge, so that's why I have it plaqued in my office. It was a very cool thing, which led to MTV calling him up saying, "Hey, you want to do an MTV Unplugged?" Sure. Well, that's a cool idea. Oh, by the way, can you get back together with Peter and Ace for a couple of songs? Ooh, that's a different story. That's what the Kiss Unplugged or the Kiss conventions led to the Kiss Unplugged, which led to the Kiss reunion. February 28th, 1996, at the 38th annual Grammys, Tupac Shakur introduces some band from New York City that had not put their makeup on in quite some time. Tupac introduces Kiss. That's just odd by itself. But Kiss was reunited on the Grammys, and then a few months later they did an introduction for their tour on the USS Intrepid. The tour was wildly successful. But man, if you listen to Paul talk or read Paul's autobiography, so much shit happened in the background during that tour, during Psycho Circus, the reunion album, and then during the tour of that, and then the farewell tour. It's insane to think what happened in the background. Did you catch any of that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've listened to excerpts from Paul's book, but just the demands that were coming from Ace and Peter, each one of them quit at one point or was fired and brought back on. the drama that was happening because there was two camps. There was the Ace and Peter camp, and then there was the Paul and Gene camp. Them not wanting them to record Psycho Circus because they didn't think they were, up to snuff, or they still had their hang-ups from before. They left the band, and this had been Paul and Gene's band for all this time, and these two guys came in and they're thinking, oh, this is our thing again. I was in the band before these other guys. This is our thing, and it wasn't. It was two different mindsets from the start again, and it was just destined to fail.
Yeah. Definitely destined to fail. I mean, look, if you got a guy that's working for your company, a la Tommy Thayer, and you say, "Hey, Tommy, I need you to go get Peter Criss up to snuff." Tommy's a guitar player, so I don't know what the hell he's doing trying to teach Peter Criss. But I'm sure, he's a professional, and he went out there and he tried to teach Peter his drum parts again. And he tried to get him up to snuff. It worked. Then he had to work on Ace Frehley. And, the arrogance was Ace Frehley was like, hey, I'm the one who came up with this shit. And then Tommy turned around and go, yeah, but you play the shit wrong. You need to play it right. We don't play it like that, And it's like, oh. Once Ace was able to put that aside, he worked well with Tommy, and Ace loves to dig at Tommy now, saying, hey, this guy's doing my parts and he's not even doing them that good. I'm sorry, but I disagree. As everyone can criticize Tommy for putting the makeup on, but Tommy's a better guitar player at this point than Ace Frehley.
But I even find, I don't like it because I think they should get their own characters, but that's not really Tommy and Eric's fault. And they have a steady gig where they're playing the music that they want to play, and they've been effective members of that band for however long they've been in the band at this point.
20 years.
Yeah, so I don't really have...
No, not 20. 20, more than 20, because it's 95 to 2005, 2015. So, I mean, it happened it was more like, early 2000s. So, definitively, those guys have been in the band for, 18 to 20 years each. Eric Singer's been on and off more than that. He's been in the band almost for 30.
I don't have a problem with Tommy and Eric doing their thing. They're getting paid. They're working all the time. They're being effective members of the band. They're doing what they're asked of. So I don't really see a reason to complain about either of those guys. It's I get it. I get why, as a fan, you would want to see the original guys because there's the nostalgia factor. But they haven't been a band, and they weren't even a band that long.
No, that's the problem. Look, I don't blame Tommy. I don't blame Eric. They're told, hey, you need to put makeup on. You're either in or out. Okay, so they both chose to be.
If it wasn't them, it would be somebody else.
Exactly. Bruce Kulick was never going to wear makeup. He wasn't invited back, but it wasn't because he wasn't invited back because he didn't want to put the makeup on, but it's because Paul knew that it just wasn't his thing.
Yeah. He had never been in the makeup era of the band. It would be kind of weird to make him go up there and be somebody else other than himself.
Exactly. And then with Tommy, no one knew him outside of certain circles. And, I remember the day that I went to that KISS convention, I'm walking in the back and they're showing me where we have to set up. And the guy showing me where we have to set up is Tommy Thayer. Mm. And me and the other store manager were looking at him going, are you Tommy Thayer? And from Black and Blue? And he's like, yeah. We're like, cool. We literally left him and I. We told the two employees with us, look, you stay here, do whatever they tell you to do. John and I are going back home. We're getting our black and blue CDs. We'll be back. And I got my black and blue CD signed by Tommy. It was kind of weird, but I don't blame Tommy. I don't blame Eric. The bottom line is they tried it once with new characters with Eric Carr and with Vinnie Vincent. I think Eric Carr, he had to have his own makeup. Paul says that back now, if he had to do it all over again, he'd put Eric Carr in Peter's makeup.
No, I disagree.
That never would have worked. But I can understand the Ace, the Ankh Warrior, like kind of regretting that. But I think if they would have come up with a better concept, it probably wouldn't have been so bad. Or if they would have had a guitar player that stuck around longer, it wouldn't have been so bad. But now they go back and say, okay, these are the 4 iconic symbols. These are 4 iconic characters. This is what we have to do in order to maintain this. And I get it. You know what? And people, because if you think about the way Paul Stanley puts it, people want to see Kiss. People want to see Spaceman, Catman, Star Child, and Demon. That's what they get. Now, the kids of today don't know Peter and Ace. They just know that those were 2 guys in the band, but they don't know that, they created those characters from scratch. I mean, they probably do if they read about it, but they don't realize how bad, per se, those guys would be if they were actually in the band. They're getting a concept of a guy who's up there who is the Space Ace or the Space Man, put it that way, and the Cat Man. They're playing their parts. That's it. I don't have a problem with it. I don't blame them. It's, if you're going to blame anybody, you're going to blame Paul, because Paul's the main guy behind it. You can get mad at Gene too, but he's just probably along for the ride anyway. So,
yeah,
reunion era Kiss was just bound to fail.
I mean, I would still consider. What would you call today's era, though? I mean, they're not reunion era per se, but they're the guys that came out of the reunion era.
Modern makeup era, I guess you could say.
I guess so. Yeah, like the modern era of Kiss. So my thoughts on it, like, I'm not a big fan of those last couple albums. I've only listened to them like the one time that I had to for the show. It's a nostalgia act. It's purely a nostalgia act now. They're not putting out new music. They're living off the legacy of what they created, and that's fine. There's really nothing wrong with that per se. Like, people go to see the show because they want to see the Kiss show. They want to see what they remember. Or if they're a lifelong fan and they travel along and go see as many shows as they want, great, enjoy it. But you're not expecting anything beyond that anymore. And there's the controversy with using backing tracks and this and that. Well, Paul's in his 70s right now. Like, you kind of go knowing what you're expecting to see. And if you don't know, then, I guess you're just not really that big on, following the band. But I have a hard time being upset about any of it. There's not going to be too many more shows with Kiss. If you want to go see the show, go see the show. Enjoy it. It may be your only opportunity in the next 10 years or so, because they've talked about replacing them, and that's just a cover band. Like, nobody wants to see that.
No, for that, you'll just see a regular Kiss cover band.
Just go see a cheap Kiss cover band, and don't pay hundreds of dollars to go see the official cover band.
Right? No, I wouldn't do that either. I agree with you. I mean, I when you sit there and said that Paul Stanley's in the 70s, he's 70 years old, right? And then Gene is 73. The wild thing about that is, you think about the fact that they're 70 and 73 respectively, right? Paul's going to be 71 come January 20th. So they're relatively 2.5 years apart. It's insane to think that at that age, they're still doing what they do. They're still wearing those costumes or outfits, as they would like to call it, the boots, the guitars, the extra excess weight, especially Gene. And I mean, Gene's 73 years old and he's wearing that 30-pound fucking football uniform with those boots.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing testament to that guy. I mean, he says it straight up because there's nobody out there right now that could do what we do with what we do it with. And it's absolutely true. Okay, and now mind you, they're conditioned for that. That's what makes professional athletes. And I'm not calling Gene a professional athlete, but that's what makes professional athletes what they are. They are conditioned to do what they do. So Kiss is conditioned to do what they do. You know, wearing the suits, the makeup, and all that stuff, and that's tough. And it's amazing that those guys can do it at this age. I mean, that's why when you sit there and say you want Ace back or you want Peter, dude, they cannot play with that gear on. I'm sorry, they just can't.
No, but they could go out for one song or two songs and go, like, you know, appreciate all of the eras of the band or something like that. They're not going to bring Vinny back. We all know that. And excuse me. And Mark St. John's gone, but it would be cool, you know, last couple shows, bring back Bruce, you know, play a couple songs with him.
Bruce does the Kiss cruises. That's so cool.
Yeah. But bring back Ace and Peter, play a couple songs, you know, don't expect anything more than that. And that would be cool. But if they don't, then that's cool too, because they've kept this band going for this long, and it's their right to do pretty much whatever they want. But again, I think for the fandom, for the people that have been supporting them all these years, it would be cool to see, you know, the original guys together for one or two songs just to finish off their career.
That would be cool. And I don't know if I would go out of my way to buy a ticket for that, but it would be cool to see that maybe on TV or something like that, broadcast. That would be cool. To some, I know we skimmed over this modern makeup era Kiss. I mean, to sum it up, I mean, the reunion was, for lack of a better term, successful the first time. The Psycho Circus tour was not as successful. The farewell tour was not as successful in terms of the way they felt about what they were doing, to the point where the farewell tour was done because they didn't want to continue with these other two guys. It fell apart. And then because Eric Singer came back for some shows and because Tommy Thayer replaced Ace Frehley for other shows, it gave them an inspiration. And they when they ended up having to play with both Eric and Tommy as replacements, as in a temporary sense, because Peter and Ace were still technically part of Kiss, and they played that show, it was like a light bulb turned on for Paul, and he's like, this is the band. So they made it official. Then they, you know, since that point, it's been that way, and you know, they've never looked back, and it's been a moderate success for them since that point. I take nothing away from them. It is pretty cool. You know, if you want to go out and see that show, like we mentioned at the beginning of this episode, what they do now is more bombastic. It's more powerful. It's more over the top than anything they did in the 70s and early 80s, which is just incredible to think. So
I don't think, though, they have this resurgence, this amount of success that they're experiencing now, had they not done the reunion tour.
Oh no, absolutely not.
So
absolutely not.
So even if it wasn't great and it didn't, you know, like, soothe their souls and they're not happy with that time period, the benefits of it, I think, are there. You know, they experienced a resurgence of their career. Yeah, they're not, you know, top 10 on the radio. They don't have any new songs or anything like that, but they're doing really well.
No, without the reunion, they don't exist nowadays. And that's fine. They did it they did it for all the right reasons back then. They did it because they wanted to reunite. I don't take anything away from them. They saw an opportunity, they took it and they ran with it, and it gave them the life that they needed back. Okay, but it became, as much as they tried to do it for all the right reasons, all those reasons came, with the baggage that eventually overtook them.
I think all the right reasons is
just cash.
Maybe
just cash.
Yeah, right.
Cash.
I was gonna say I don't think that's really all the right reasons.
It's one reason they did it for the money. I get it, but at some point it was like it's like we can't do this anymore with these people, and so
I get that.
So I like 70s Kiss. I like 80s Kiss. I even like that lost time period, between 79 and 81. I accept that for what it is. The Kiss that's there now, they're trying to sell fans, that they're going to continue without Paul and Gene. I don't even think Eric and Tommy are going to continue without Paul and Gene. Personally, I think they both said that they can't. They wouldn't feel right. I know Eric won't. Tommy, the thing about Tommy that not a lot of people know, Tommy works for the machine that is called Kiss. He does a lot of stuff in the background that nobody knows anything about. And so he will probably work for the corporation till he is done working, period. And if that means that he has to go out and be the lead guy in the Kiss tribute band, I think he'll do it. But I think I really think that him and Eric are going to sit down with Paul and Gene and say it's not going to happen. It can't. But who knows what's going to happen?
Who knows?
All right. Well, that brings us to our big four tonight. And so we're getting close to the end of this episode. This big four is a little bit different than what we normally do. But again, it's a big four. It is the big four Paul Stanley Kiss songs. So these are songs performed by Paul Stanley in Kiss. There's a lot of songs to choose from. You can like all sorts of different eras. Me personally, my stuff falls within one particular time period. But
it's all the elder stuff.
It's yes. No. Well, the number one performance for me, I'm just going to go straight to it, is Just a Boy. Okay? That's it. I'm done.
100%. 100%, 1,000%. It's
no,
okay.
all. You want me to go first on this one?
Well, you just said what your number one was, so I mean, go ahead. Yeah, you can go first.
All right. So my big four Paul Stanley Kiss songs, and again, like I said, there's a shit ton of them, but these are the ones that really stand out to me. Number 4, Creatures of the Night, the title track. I mean, I love that album. I mean, it has really become probably my favorite album from Kiss. That and Revenge. And even though, I completely disagree with Eddie Trunk saying that, he thinks that Revenge is shit compared to Hot in the Shade. I don't know what kind of crack he's on, but Creatures of the Night to me is better than all of them. So that's my number 4.
He thinks Hot in the Shade is better than Revenge?
Yes. Don't even get me started. Number 3, Making Love off of Rock and Roll Over. What an amazing song that is. And I mean, if we're talking about Ace Frehley guitar solos, that's one of them that's right up there. I mean, it's one of the best solos he's put on tape. But the performance from Paul Stanley on this is also outstanding. So I love that song. Number 2, I Stole Your Love off of Love Gun. Another outstanding song. I love the fact that for a long period of time during the 77 tour, that was the opening song. Then they did that as an opening song during one of their 80's. I think it was the Asylum tour. It could have been Crazy Nights. I can't remember. But that was the opening song to one of their tours during the 80's. And number 1 for me is my favorite song from Kiss, hands down. It's Detroit Rock City. It's just an outstanding performance from Paul, an outstanding recording, an outstanding song. So there's my big 4 Paul Stanley Kiss songs.
Well, I think we only have one crossover, but it's a good list. My number 4 is Strutter off of the first album. I just always really like that song. It's kind of like that early 70s rock, but it's a good performance, and I really like it. My number 3 is Tears Are Falling off of Asylum. Now, that song gets stuck in my head. It is an earworm. I like it. It's kind of cheesy with the music video, but I like that era of the band, so yeah, it's a cool song. My number 2 is Creatures of the Night off of Creatures of the Night. For the same reasons you said, it's a great album, it's a great song, it's a really cool bombastic opening to that album, and I just really enjoy it. And my number 1 is Love Gun off of Love Gun. Love that song. I really first got into it because of what was the Paul Rudd movie where they dressed up as Kiss while they were fighting.
I can't remember the name of the movie, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's Role Models, I think is the name.
Yeah, Role Models.
So good, and that song has just kind of stuck with me ever since. And I really like that album. I think it's a little bit underrated for the era that it's in. But that is my favorite song off of that album and one of my favorite Kiss songs. So
that's a good list. I like that. I mean, there's so many Paul Stanley songs to choose from, especially during the 80s.
True.
But, again, growing up in that time period in the 70s, I mean, it's just those albums resonate with me so deep. But yeah. It's a cool list. I like that. I mean, I like Love Gun. I like Creatures, obviously. Tears Are Falling. That's a surprise. It's funny that you like that song.
It surprises me but it really does stick in my head. And something about the rhythm of it, like that opening riff, just sticks in my head.
And I like Strutter too, because Strutter, I mean, that's the first thing anybody heard. So there was so much attitude. I mean, that's just such a New York song. Mm-hmm. And it's really good. I love the attitude that Paul sings that song with. So, well, cool, man. Well, that's our big 4 Paul Stanley Kiss songs, and that's all we have for you for this episode. By now, you should know the drill. You click like or subscribe, or you download the show to your favorite device. You press play, you sit back, you relax, and you listen to us whenever you want.
And don't forget you can leave us a comment on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. YouTube viewers, click subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when we post a new episode. So tune into next week when we spark up another exciting debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.